were just getting hooked up out there with something. I have no idea what it is, but we'll use it. So, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, indeed, thank you. And I am Edward Orton. I am presently the president of the university here. I'm also professor of geology, mining, and metallurgy. You're the first public group to know, my faculty and students know, I'm stepping down at the end of the next academic year. This will be, I'm in my 7th year as the president. I think it's time to change. We're off on a new venture. By way of background, I'm from a small town of Deposit, New York. Graduated from Hamilton College and the Lawrence Scientific School at Harvard. I'm an ordained minister, having graduated from Lane Theological Seminary in Cincinnati and the Andover Theological Seminary, where I did some additional studies. I've taught science at the New York Normal School in Albany and was principal of the Preparatory Academy in Chester, New York. In 1865, I came to Ohio, where I was professor of natural history at Antioch College in Yellow Springs, Ohio. I became president there in 1872. After a scant year serving as president, I took the position here in Columbus. I was leaving an established traditional college with a distinguished background in history to head not only a new college, but one associated with an entirely new concept of education. My colleagues in Yellow Springs asked if I had rocks in my head. I replied, frankly, yes. The rocks in my head are igneous, sedimentary, and metamorphic. I am, after all, a geologist. My presidential experience at Antioch was quite different from the early experience I had here in Columbus. While I'm pleased by the way things have turned out, and I feel that the future is bright, I had my doubts in the early stages of my presidency. I was not invited to attend meetings of the Board of Trustees. I had no role in the selection of the faculty, and no role in the establishment of the curriculum. On September 17th of 1873, 7 years ago, nearly, we registered some 25 students at the new college. It was not an auspicious start for an academic institution. It was not easy for the students or the faculty to reach our site. The Worthington Pike leading to the site of the college from the central part of Columbus was a muddy, rutted road in very poor shape, largely due to the wagons bringing the heavy construction material to the building site. The building, which would serve as the classroom and administration, as well as faculty offices, was not yet complete, and construction on the student dormitory hadn't even begun yet. We were surrounded by the pounding of hammers, the singing of the saw, and the loud and often colorful language of the workmen. The site of the college was located in a vast field of mud, building materials, and dirt piles, as well as piles of horse manure, which lent a distinctive odor to our enterprise. Our site resembled more that of a vast Jurassic-era mudplain, much like that which must have trapped the dinosaurs. We were far behind in our construction. You'll also remember 1873. In 1873, we entered what would become a very severe economic recession. So severe was that recession that Miami University in Oxford closed closed its doors with no indication as to when or even if it would ever reopen. It was questionable as to whether we would or should open. Our trustees established that we would open on September 17th, 1873, and so 3 years after we were established, 1870, we opened. Allow me to reminisce a bit as I look back. How did we arrive at this point? We're the product of the Morrill Act proposed in 1857 by then Senator Justin Morrill of Vermont. I have a feeling that archaeologists and paleontologists, thousands of years in the future, will find a copy of this act and see it as the dawn of a new era. Much like what you would find with a fossil embedded in a rock, which can both be seen and evaluated and studied as an evolutionary change. The Morrill Act allowed for the sale of public lands, the revenue from which would provide states with an endowment to establish special colleges and universities. The purpose of these land grant colleges was, and I quote, without excluding other scientific and classical studies, and including military tactics, to teach such branches of learning as are related to agriculture and the mechanical arts, in such a manner as legislatures of the state may respectively prescribe, in order to promote the liberal and practical education of the industrial classes in the several pursuits of their professions in life. Let me repeat that last part. In order to promote the liberal and practical education of the industrial classes in the several pursuits and professions in life. I'll come back to this a bit later. The original proposal, after a bitter 2-year legislative battle, although passed by Congress in 1859, was vetoed by President James Buchanan. Upon resubmission after the start of the Civil War and the loss of the members of Congress from the South, almost all of whom had opposed the original bill, the bill was passed and signed by President Abraham Lincoln in July of 1862. Just beginning of the Civil War there. States were allocated 30,000 acres for each of its senators and 30,000 acres for each of its representatives. We had, obviously, 2 senators, and we had 19 representatives in Congress. The state would be responsible for the management of the sale of the public lands. In November of 1862, then Ohio Governor David Todd urged the legislature to accept the conditions of the Morrill Act. But due to a great deal of concern on the part of the public and leaders of the state, it was not until February of '64 that the legislature accepted the conditions of the act, but didn't decide which institution or institutions would receive the funds. To create the endowment, the state of Ohio had to manage the sale of its share of the lands. Ohio had been given 630,000 acres to put up for sale. All in all, by 1867, the sale of the lands brought in nearly $341,000. This vastly exceeded the endowments of the established colleges in the state: Ohio University, Miami University, Ohio Wesleyan, Oberlin, and Kenyon. The competition for the Morrill funds was keen, as you undoubtedly can imagine. The legislature passed a series of acts which dealt with the Morrill Act, but the most significant was that of the Cannon Act, introduced by Representative Reuben Cannon of Portage, Ohio, Portage County. This act had in it a number of key elements. It created a board of trustees, 19 in number, 1 from each of our congressional districts. The trustees were proposed by the governor, confirmed by the Senate. The trustees were charged with making of all decisions. I know that because I wasn't asked. All decisions for the establishment of what would be called the Ohio Agricultural and Mechanical College. The location of the college, the curriculum, the faculty, and the administration. At this time, Governor Rutherford B. Hayes, who himself was a strong advocate for education and for the new college, he himself was an educated man, having graduated from Kenyon College and Harvard Law School. He had an expansive and liberal philosophy of education. By the way, the governor's wife, Lucy Webb Hayes, was also a graduate of college, having graduated in 1850 from the Methodist Female College in Cincinnati, Ohio. She would become the first lady with a college education. The trustees quickly embarked upon the selection for the site of the new college. The Canon Act had set limits for the site. It could not be less than 100 acres. It had to be located centrally in the state. It had to be accessible by rail from the different parts of the state. And it had to be selected by October of 1870. The college should consist of at least 4 departments: agriculture, mechanical arts, military science, and literature. 4 counties ultimately submitted bids for the site. Champaign County, that would be Urbana, Clark, Springfield, Franklin, Columbus, and Montgomery, Dayton. Each bid was to be accompanied by a sum of money amounting to not less than $100,000, since the Morrill Act funds were not allowed to be used for the land acquisition or for the buildings. After each county made its presentations, and there was a long series of debated meetings, Franklin County in Columbus, Ohio was selected. It was the most centrally located. It offered the second highest financial package, and it was served by 2 railroads, which pledged $28,000 each to the offer. After the selection of Franklin County, the trustees voted to use the bid and the donation to purchase the Neal Farm from Mr. Robert Neal. And so here we are. We have a location. Now we need a curriculum, faculty, and academic leadership. The curriculum was debated very early on, sometimes in the governor's office. It was deemed so important that it was one of the main items for discussion at that very first meeting in May of 1870, and continued actively for subsequent meetings. Now, I recognize that all members of the Board of Trustees are important, but I have to single out 2 as exceptional. The first of these was Dr. Norton Townsend. Dr. Townsend was president of the Ohio Board of Agriculture and an ex officio member of the Board of Trustees. He was born in England, and at age 15, he immigrated to the United States with his parents. He was educated at the Columbia College of Physicians and Surgeons and studied at some of the most prestigious medical centers in the world: London, Edinburgh, Dublin, and Paris. But he practiced medicine in Avon, Ohio. Became an advocate, interestingly, for the teaching of the scientific basis of agriculture. The second is Mr. Joseph Sullivan, a prominent member of the community and the son of one of the earliest residents and the original surveyor of Franklin County, Lucas Sullivan. Joseph was a reluctant member of the board who had really asked Governor Hayes to withdraw his name from nomination to the board because of his outspoken nature and his liberal views that had stirred controversy and opposition in the Senate. Hayes refused, put his name forward, fought for his confirmation, and he was confirmed. During the discussion of the curriculum, Townsend stated that the course of instruction in the college should embrace not only the sciences that especially pertain to the agricultural and mechanical arts, but also the practical instruction that will make labor of every industrial class more successful and elevating. He felt this new college should do what other colleges in the state did not do: provide education directly related to agriculture, mechanical, and vocational needs of the state. Sullivan proposed 10, in his model, 10 departments. He would teach all that was worthy of being taught, but his priority was to teach what was calculated to fit our pupils for the practical duties of life. Notice how both have used the phrase practical. Sullivan's 10 departments were agriculture, physics and mechanics, mathematics and engineering, general and applied chemistry, geology, mineralogy, and metallurgy, zoology and veterinary science, botany, horticulture, plant anatomy and physiology, English and literature, modern and ancient languages, political economics and civil polity, and finally, military tactics. Due to limited resources, 6 departments were initially formed. There will ultimately be 7, I'll come to that. The faculty consisted of the following individuals: Thomas Mendenhall, physics and mechanics; Sidney Norton, general and applied chemistry; Joseph Milligan, English and modern languages as well as literature; John Henry Wright, ancient languages and literature; Robert McFarland, mathematics and engineering. Fortuitously, McFarland became available when Miami was forced to close its doors due to the financial difficulties about which I spoke earlier. Dr. Norton Townsend resigned his position on the Board of Agriculture and as an ex officio member of the Board of Trustees to teach agriculture. 2 of Dr. Townsend's children, including the older of his 2 daughters, were among the first registrants that September 17th. Ultimately, his other daughter would become a member of a class after that. Many were surprised at this, admitting women when the purpose of an education at the higher level was to improve one's opportunities for employment. Women were expected to be homemakers. We had a different idea. As all of us faculty members, I include myself there, because I volunteered to teach geology, mining, and metallurgy, a 7th department. They got me for free there because I was already being paid as president. All of us as faculty members were disposed to seeking the laws of nature in its various phenomena, in which nature conceals them rather than from the tomes of the library. We were interested in the discovery of new knowledge, not just relying on what was already known and found in libraries. We would rely more on observation and direct experience, not rote memory. The educability of man is one of his most distinguishing characteristics. But he has no monopoly there. Certain higher groups of animals are capable of being trained or taught. But if man is not the only educable animal, he is certainly the only educator. In the caves of Ingus, in the Valley of the Meuse, in the province of Liège, Belgium, the earliest skulls determined to be human were found some years back. These skulls, according to the prominent English biologist Thomas Huxley, had the capacity, the volume, to hold the brains of a philosopher. So whether skulls belong to a sage or a savage, based upon what was found with the skulls, we can be certain the owner was an educator. An educator who taught his offspring the secrets of the hunt, the chase, and the kill, how to fracture flint, the virtues of fire, which vegetables were fit for food, and the rites of burial. In other words, the elements of natural history, physics, perhaps even metaphysics, and theology as well. So my friends, by 1873 we have a site, a partially completed building, a faculty, and students. But what would be the character of the education to be furnished by this new institution that formally opened its doors some 7 years ago? In many measures, the character of the education was defined by the terms of the congressional grant, to which we owe its foundation. However, I'm reminded of the eminent English barrister who was wont to aver that he could drive a coach and four through any act passed by Parliament. I believe the operative phrase is loophole. Our education was expressed in three parts. The first part, the education was to be furnished was the industrial education, or in the words of the law, as you'll recall, to promote the education of the industrial classes in the several pursuits and professions of life. Now, who are the industrial classes of American society? If I were asked, I would answer, it's the great mass of the American people. But certainly the term cannot be limited to the classes that live by manual labor. The manufacturer, the builder, the engineer, the farmer, who provide the control of manual labor of scores of hundreds without being able to put their hands on the plow or the plane or the spindle, belong by the best of right to the industrial classes. It may be counted as certain, however, that in these beneficent provisions, a kindly eye is cast upon those who cannot avail themselves of existing educational foundations that are already laid. The provision of the best advantages of higher education, of instruction at lower rates than elsewhere, and consequent removal of that great obstacle from the rank and file of society in the way of obtaining an education, we may certainly set down as one of the objects designed. To the point, education at a low tuition cost. To the mass of the industrial classes of this state, the privileges of Harvard, Yale, or Vassar are practically as inaccessible as those of Cambridge in England or Heidelberg in Germany. Educated labor for which science is waiting before it can realize its great ideals, without which capital starves on its broad acres or amid its gold, is coming to place scarcely less honorable than either. This college found a worthy and congenial field in this great division of American life. The second part of this education was practical. A practical education is an education that can be applied to the necessities and demands of everyday life, that can be used in the ordinary work of the world. The branches of common school education, for the most part, practical branches, we use the knowledge acquired from reading, writing, spelling, arithmetic, in all our buying, selling, and obtaining of material gain. Without this knowledge, we cannot transact business of life, trigonometry, geometry, surveying, engineering, practical studies, establish the metes and bounds in the construction of roads and aqueducts. Chemistry teaches the farmer the composition of the soil, what causes its exhaustion, and the laws of its renewal. The manufacture of iron, steel, glass, soap, paint are all chemical processes. Geology teaches the veins of ore and the seams of coal. The science of mechanics must be learned by the architect and the engineer before their work can stand. In the third and final part, the education furnished was that of liberal education. Aristotle was the first to use this term. It was designed to be the education of the free man. I think we concluded that this education gives the possessor freedom. Freedom from the slavery of the uneducated mind. Can we indeed improve upon John Milton's ideal of liberal education when he said, "I call therefore a complete and generous education that which fits a man to perform justly, skillfully, magnanimously in all offices, both private and public, or in war and peace." To serve such purposes, a liberal education must always be abreast of its time. It must take in the best and amplest knowledge yet attained. And thus we see that it cannot be the same yesterday, today, or forever. Some permanent characteristics it does indeed possess, but its actual contents vary for each generation. What then is a liberal education? I agree with John Stuart Mill that it is the education that includes science and literature. It is the education that embraces the study of the world of matter, physical science, and the study of man, his language, his literature, his history, his art, his relations with his fellow man, and his maker. The day has gone well by when an educated man can be called liberally educated by knowing a little Latin and a little less Greek, while being ignorant of modern science. So for these past 7 years, we have provided an industrial, practical, and liberal education. From the humble beginnings in 1873, with some 25 students, 7 faculty, an unfinished building, no dormitory, but a curricular philosophy that meets our needs. But with the curricular philosophy that meets our needs, is therefore in keeping with the original act, we move forward. In June of 1878, I presided over our first commencement of 6 graduates. Also in the same year, from the name of the college was changed from the Agricultural and Mechanical College to the Ohio State University in order to be more reflective of our broader scope of education on campus. I was supportive of the name change. I was a little concerned about the appropriateness of naming the institution a university because we offered so few programs as yet. Concern were expressed by others, some more strongly, that we had strayed away from our agricultural mission. Concern was also expressed that we had removed both the words agriculture and mechanical, read that as engineering, from the name. Other changes that have taken place in these years, the enrollment has reached 198, with the student body coming from 52 counties in Ohio. The faculty has reached 12, teaching in 12 departments, including military science and tactics. Students have moved out of the original building, called now University Hall, into 2 new dormitories. Some departments have also moved out of the University Hall into more specialized buildings, such as engineering, which had moved into a new building just last year, 1879. And so, my friends, we're on our way. It seems like it's taken a long time, but looking back, it really hasn't. Where we end up is anyone's guess. As I had mentioned, I've recently announced that I will step down from the presidency at the end of the term next year, 1881. I will continue as a professor of geology and continue in my capacity as the state geologist of Ohio. Another president whose term is coming to an end in 1881 is President Rutherford Burchard Hayes. He will not seek a second term, a promise he made when he was inaugurated. President Hayes continues as a strong advocate for education. He feels that the education is the most effective pathway for raising the population to its true potential. Further, he believes in combining both academic and vocational education. Recently, when speaking to a reporter about higher education, the president said, "I preach the gospel of work. I believe skilled labor is as much a part of the educational process as anything else." Having been instrumental in the formation of this institution, he's keenly aware of our progress. Perhaps in the near future, he would be open to becoming a member of our board of trustees. Wouldn't it be interesting to have an ex-president as a member of the Board of Trustees? Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you very much for your kind indulgence with me as I reminisce with you, and I'd be happy to respond to any questions you might have. Thank you very much. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Dr. Orton. I think we all learned a great deal to our benefit. We thank you for making the trip here today. I wanted to ask you about the student body during the time of your presidency. Were there any women who applied? Were there any students from outside of the borders of Ohio? And were there any who could not afford the tuition but were offered scholarship help?
Let me go through those a bit. Yes, we did. We have several women among the 198 that we have here. I'm sure there are some that still find that even though we have a lower tuition than any of the other institutions around, that it is still a burden. We are asking the state, and one of the reasons I'd like to see President Hayes become part of this. He is a big advocate for student aid in this regard. Right now, we do not have the resources to do that. A number of students work. For instance, we entered a group of students in 73. Our first graduating class was 78. So there's a great deal of students who work, come back, and so forth. Being as small as we are, we're able to accommodate that. Many others can't. Among the 198, we do have a few from out of state. I must say that our legislators are saying that they should pay a higher tuition. I'm not sure about that, but we'll have to see how that goes. Yes?
Sir, in developing the governing body for the Ohio State University, was there any discussion whether it should be appointed, as apparently it is, or elected, as some other land-grant schools have chosen?
I'm sorry, did the Board of Trustees elected?
Yeah.
The legislature, as part of the Canon Act, indicated that the people would be nominated by the governor and confirmed by the Senate. And as there have been changes, that's the way it is done.
There was no discussion of another method.
In the early, I wasn't around for a lot of the early discussions in the legislative level, but there were some suggestions along that line. Several other states have done that. Yes?
You talked about some of your new buildings. Up until the 1970s, a lot of the buildings for universities were government support. When your new buildings were built, did they come from government support or like today, philanthropic donations by wealthy, like I think Carnegie did libraries? Did you get help from private philanthropists?
No, we did not. We did not. The construction monies had to come from the original grant from the competing counties. The endowment had to go for support of faculty and so forth in that regard. So all of that came after the fact. Yes?
Sir, where were the land grants located, and how was the land disposed of and the proceeds used?
You have me as to the exact where the over 600,000 acres, 630,000 acres came from, or where they were located. That was all established by Congress, and then it was put up for sale. University, the state of Ohio had to be the body that cared for the sale and cared for the money in that regard. I don't know if that really answers your question, but There were several acres of land in various parts of the state that were federal lands that were put up. Yes?
One of those land-grant colleges was at Lincoln, Nebraska.
Oh, I'm sorry, you were asking other colleges, other land-grant colleges?
No, I just wondered if you know where the specific land was located that
I
was
do not.
used to finance the new institution.
Yes.
Well, with 198 students, you would have enough to start a football team. And that's a new game that they play. And Nebraska also plays football. And I was wondering if there might be some interaction in the future between the Nebraska team and the Ohio University.
I am familiar with the game. I'm a big advocate for physical activity. I am yet convinced that a college, although many have done this, a college or a university, should sponsor that as part of their process. I go all the way back to the very first game that was played, 1868, between Rutgers and the College of New Jersey. Rutgers won the first game. They set up a second game to be played 2 weeks later. College of New Jersey won that. They set up a time later for the rubber match. The faculty said, no, we're not going to do that. There's no educational benefit to what's going on. One of the things that I'm constantly asked is, do you know that the school at Ann Arbor is doing such and such and so and so? They created a football team in 1879, played a very small school, and won the game, and I haven't heard the last of it. I think we should be more closely compared to the college at East Lansing, which actually was the model for the land-grant colleges, and where that was called the Agricultural College for the state of Michigan. And that was established in 1855. They look very much like what we do. This other school at Ann Arbor was set up at about the same time, 1817, about the same time Ohio University in 1804, Miami in 1809, which unfortunately closed in 73. They were set up along the same sort of lines, but we're constantly compared with that one. And I'm not sure exactly why. They want to know when we're going to have a medical school, when we're going to have a law school. Have you looked at the number of medical colleges in the Columbus area? There are at least 3, and there's another one coming along. It's beyond me. And I'm sorry, yes?
I might just add that the very first land-grant college was the Kansas State University
Manhattan.
in Manhattan, and that they have also established one of those football teams too, but they have allocated their resources in a different direction. They're not quite as good at that yet.
I think it's a good thing I'm stepping down. Yes, sir.
Mr. President, just a few years ago, our nation came through this horrible war, and I'd like to ask you a question pertaining to 3 groups of people that were affected by that and how the curriculum is going to serve them. We had a lot of men severely maimed in that war as Ohioans went south and other places. They came back. I'm not hearing much being spoken of what you would do for that group. I also know the good citizens of Ohio supported very much abolition. and a lot of freedmen have come to Ohio. But in all of those groups, we also have people, Mr. President, who just don't quite have the moral standards we have. I don't hear anything about religion in all of your curriculum. What are you thinking about that, please, Mr. President?
Well, let me go with the last one first. I'm an ordained minister. I'm called to the pulpit every once in a while. But one of the early things that happened was that the Board of Trustees, in looking at the curriculum, said, should we have mandatory chapel like everyone else has? The faculty, on the other hand, said, no, we don't want to. We'll have a place for a chapel, but we don't want it because everybody else is doing it. So here you have people who want it because everybody else is doing it. And have people over here who don't want it because everybody else is doing it. Our faculty want it to be different. I'm somewhat agnostic on the issue. I welcome any student that wants to come, and we can have a discussion, a Bible study, and that sort of thing. Now, with regard to the freedmen, I myself am an abolitionist. I feel very strongly about that. I would welcome, as we go through the process, and as we look at what is done with over the years, we're still working with Reconstruction. After what happened with the compromise of '77, as you well know, and Hayes had to compromise in order to take the presidency. One of the things he did was he took the federal troops out of the South. There goes Reconstruction. There goes any sort of hold we had on doing what's right for both the freed slave and the freed man who had lived as a freed black man in the South. So I'm very welcome to that, and would advocate that as the time comes around. Yes?
Sir, some of the state colleges and land-grant institutions are in the state capital cities, and others are not. Do you feel that your institution benefits from being in the same city as the state government?
Well, it hasn't to date. This whole new concept of the education, and I must admit, I keep having to call upon my good friend R.B. Hayes, who feels that the state should take a greater role in what we have here. And I think he will do what he can in his twilight years of post-presidency. But I feel right now I think the one great thing we have here is the fact that we are centrally located. It's relatively easy to get to us. We now have a fourth railroad that comes through here, two originally, and now a third and fourth, which makes it relatively easy for students to get here. And I think that's something that will, I think, come around. I really do. Yes?
Mr. President, how did your name get involved with the Orton-Gillingham reading method?
I have no idea. Is that the other Orton?
I don't know. I just heard it was you.
No, I don't think so. I just read like everybody else.
Really? Well, my other question is, if you didn't have anything to do with curriculum, and you didn't have anything to do with the faculty, what did you do?
Thought great thoughts. Had lots of time to do that. No, I jest about that. Actually, as time came around, the Board of Trustees and I came to a mutually agreeable outcome. That I was the Chief Executive Officer of the institution. And that I needed to know, they needed to know how I felt, I needed to know how they felt. And that I had the faculty on my side for that, as well as many of the students as well. So right now it's different. My successor will have, I think, an easier time of that. It eased up a bit in around 76, 77 in there. They would come and ask me, well, what do you think about this? You're running the place. Yes.
If you were to look ahead 100 years, thinking about your legacy, what do you feel you have left of yourself at Ohio State University, the Ohio State University?
Oh, I like the emphasis there. I think I've had an influence on broadening the curriculum. I think I've had an influence on the type of faculty that we're acquiring. I like the fact that we have expanded the library significantly. As you heard me say early on, we wanted to discover. We wanted to discover new knowledge. But that requires that we have access to existing literature, which we did not have. And now with a lot of things moving out of University Hall, we can acquire new reading material. I think the most aesthetic thing that I have done is I have cleaned up the area around University Hall. It now makes a pleasing appearance. And so now the thing I'm looking for is a place to put all of the rocks and things that I have, filling up my space and any space that I have on my property. Because I'm looking for something like, if anyone has a large warehouse. Yes, sir.
Your salary upon retirement?
I really don't talk about personal finance. Mrs. Orton thinks it's modest. If you're married, you know what I mean. Yes?
Dr. Orton, are we going into an ice age right now?
An ice age?
Yes. And
Certainly it was cold this past winter. I must say. I don't know that there's any indication that that any of us in this room will have to endure another ice age. Beyond that, I think anything is open. Just look back at all the other times that we have come through those types of things. Yes.
Now that you're stepping down, what do you see as your future? What are your aspirations now that you're stepping down from this position?
I will do a great deal of cataloging. I have not had a good opportunity to do that. As I said, I have a number of specimens that I've been able to either acquire on my own or others have brought to me. So I see myself doing some publishing and contributing to our knowledge of the geological aspects of the state of Ohio. There's a lot to look at out there that we haven't done. Well, thank you so much for your now that I'm out of character, I'm always a character. Anything you need me to do? Thank you all.